Hello, my fellow Double Free users. Logan Master 666 with Maggie or Magi or Maggie. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. If anyone wants to let me know, just leave me a response down below. But Chapter 4 review, and I just got done reading it, and I gotta say, this was quite possibly the best chapter so far because it was a fuckload of information finally. It wasn't massively filled with comedy like some of the previous chapters, but it had its fair share of moments, and what can I say? It gave us a shitload of information. So in this chapter, we learn about dungeons. Thank God. And I'm shitting bricks because the first dungeon shows up, and they said long ago, the first sighting was blah blah blah. This dungeon just appeared up from the sky, and I'm like, or sorry, not from the sky, appeared up from the ground, and I was like, oh shit, they were being literal. I didn't quite understand. If you saw one of my previous reviews, I was like, wait, what? Buildings just came from the what? They were being legit. They were being serious. And apparently, this is what was known as the first dungeon. Now, it was made with this sort of architecture, this sort of cultural style that did not exist within that area or within that time. They basically looked at the ruins of it and said, okay, I have no idea where or when this could have come from, what civilization could have carved this. We have no fucking clue. And when they tried to break that son of a bitch, it didn't work. That shit was made out of like armament hockey or some bullshit. And they basically said, okay, let's see if we can explore it because there was only one entrance and that bitch was radiating light. So they said, okay, let's go into it. 2,000 people went in and fucking died. Yeah, yeah, it's definitely not a blessing from the heavens above for the people who were thinking that. So eventually, this one particular person, who eventually became king as a result, he stormed that place and used a giant, presumably a jinn, to take all the treasures out and become king. Now, first I was like, oh wait, maybe that's Aladdin, but I was like, wait, Aladdin's not king, so it's probably some other guy who controls a jinn or a genie or whatever. And as a result of clearing out all the treasures, it disappeared. Like, bam, it was gone. It didn't exist anymore. So that's basically what happens. And it's like, okay, well, you clear all the treasures out of a dungeon, it's gone. It served its purpose. There's no point of a dungeon that doesn't have treasure in it. As to why it disappears, that's still to be discovered, but I understand the concept that no treasure, no dungeon. So we find out that there is this seventh dungeon, apparently called Amon, and it has been around for 10 years. That is a bad thing. And the reason for that is that, and I understood this concept very well, if the dungeon, because dungeons are big, they're obvious, as we've seen from the first dungeon and the seventh dungeon. They're not small, they're not hidden, nothing like that. You can see where they're at, so people are gonna explore them at the end of the day. The fact that this thing has been standing for 10 years makes it pretty obvious that the treasure has not been retrieved because people are getting fucked. It's too difficult. And when I find out how many people have died, 100,000. What the fuck? I could not understand why they were going headfirst into this dungeon. Like, oh, no fucks given, even though 100,000 people got slaughtered in this fucking dungeon. That makes perfect sense, but hey, I'll fucking buy it. So, Alibaba basically says, wait, I'm not sure if I want to do this. He's starting to get cold feet, understandably so. 1,000 fucking people died. I'm sorry, 100,000. So basically, Aladdin says, hey, this isn't the path to death, this is the path to your dreams. I was like, okay. And then basically, they go up and then they go back down because they're like, fuck that. And it's hilarious because beforehand it was something like, okay, let's go. And they take like 10 steps. Like it literally says 10 steps and then they're there. I'm like, what? I thought that was hilarious. So they basically go to this town right by the temple, or sorry, the dungeon, and they're gathering supplies and getting ready. And in the meantime, they run into this girl who is apparently a slave. They bump into her. Actually, Aladdin bumps into her, and she spills her tray of apples or whatever. She picks them back up, and she's starting to walk away. And they know she's a slave not just by the rags on her body, but also by the cuffs that she has around her legs. And she tries her best to use her clothes to hide them. So she trips and falls, and Aladdin's like, I got an idea. Breaks the fucking chains, like, now you're not a slave, now you don't have to hide your chains. In the meantime, I'm thinking, that was valiant and all, but you just severed the middle chain. You didn't take off the actual cuffs, so she would still have to hide the cuffs. Even worse so, because it makes it obvious that she's an escaped slave because she doesn't have that chain link anymore. But maybe I'm just reading too much into it. It wasn't something to be taken like that seriously, but that's basically the end. And before the chapter ends, we basically find information about her as far as slaves in general, and that, of course, slaves in this world are just like slaves in the previous world. They're bought, they're sold, they're killed, they're not, etc., etc. And that basically, and this is common sense, if you free a slave, that's the same thing as stealing property, because that's what slaves are to slave owners, property. So that was the end of the chapter. This is a good chapter. I can't wait to find out more about this slave chick and who she works for. And I'm hoping maybe she'll become one of the main characters, or maybe not. We'll have to wait and see. I hope you guys enjoyed my review. I will be reading chapter 5 immediately and coming out with the review shortly. And sayonara.